Months later, Earl Fontaine would stand in a room full of people and say he had not done very much, that he had only opened a door. Nobody argued, but nobody believed him. What he found 11 steps below a laundry worth $800 had been in the dark for 163 years, 14 iron rings forged by hand, and a woman he had known for 20 years had spent 40 of them making sure it would be him. At 69, after 38 years spent cleaning other people's buildings, Earl Fontaine received a letter from an attorney's office on Williams Avenue, informing him he had inherited a coin laundry on Front Street, appraised at $800. It was the only thing anyone had ever left him. He read it 3 times at the kitchen table. He set it down. He made coffee. He drank the whole cup standing at the sink, looking out at the alley behind his apartment building. The same alley he had swept every Tuesday and Friday morning for 11 years. The concrete was clean. He kept it clean because that was the job, and the job mattered, and he had never needed anyone to explain that to him. He picked up the letter and read it a 4th time. The property was a coin laundry on Front Street. Mavis had owned it for 41 years. She had lived above it in the same 2-room apartment since 1983, and Earl had rented the unit across the hall from her since 2004. 20 years of borrowing her channel lock pliers and returning them the same day. 20 years of leaving a portion of whatever he cooked outside her door when she had a bad week. 20 years of passing each other in a hallway no wider than a man's arm span, saying good morning and meaning it. Mavis had died on the 14th of March at 11:22 in the morning, in room 114 of Natchitoches Regional, with no children and no husband and a nephew she hadn't spoken to in 9 years. The letter said Earl was the primary beneficiary of her estate. The coin laundry was appraised at $800. He set the letter down a second time next to the coffee cup. Earl Fontaine had worked 38 years as a custodian. He had cleaned hospitals and school buildings and the county courthouse and 3 different churches. He understood what a building cost and what it was worth, and that those 2 numbers were rarely the same. $800 for a coin laundry on Front Street that hadn't operated in 4 years was not a number that meant the building was worth $800. It meant the building had problems. It meant someone had looked at it and assigned it a number that made it easy to transfer. He folded the letter, put it in the chest pocket of his work shirt, went downstairs and swept the alley again, even though it didn't need it, because that was the only thing he knew how to do with a thought he hadn't finished thinking yet. The nephew's name was Dwayne Simmons. Earl had met him twice. Once at a Christmas gathering Mavis had organized in the hallway because neither of their apartments was large enough for a table, and once at the doorway of Mavis's unit when Dwayne had come to talk to her about something that required him to close the door. Earl had been returning her pliers that second time. He set them outside her door and went back to his apartment, and neither Mavis nor Dwayne had mentioned the visit afterward. Dwayne Simmons called Earl's cell phone on the Wednesday following the letter. He did not say hello in the way that means hello. He said it in the way that is a door being opened before anyone has been invited inside. He said Mavis had not been thinking clearly in the last year of her life. He said the laundry had been in the family for 3 generations, and that it was not something that should pass to a tenant. He said he was not trying to cause trouble. He was simply pointing out that reasonable people could look at this situation and reach a reasonable conclusion. Earl listened to all of it. He said he understood. He said he was going to go look at the building. Dwayne said he would appreciate being kept informed. Earl said he appreciated the call. He set the phone down on the nightstand. The Simmons family had owned property on Sibley Street since the 1940s. Mavis had mentioned it once years ago. In the way she mentioned things, she wanted him to understand without explaining. In Natchitoches, in those years, a Creole family holding on to land for 3 generations had fought for it in ways the deed did not record. A building with your family's name was not an asset. It was evidence that you had been here, that you had stayed. Earl understood that. He also understood that Dwayne was wrong about who Mavis had trusted and why. Both things were true at the same time. He hung up and sat on the edge of his bed for a moment. His hands were in his lap. He looked at them. 38 years of cleaning work had left them a specific way, rough at the knuckles, stained faintly around the nail beds in a way that never fully went away. They were hands that had been inside walls and under floors and above ceilings, and they had never once been paid what the work was worth. And he had understood that when he took the first job, and he had understood it when he took the last one. He was not a man who spent time being angry about the shape of things, but he sat on the edge of that bed for a little while longer than usual. Then he put on his jacket and his cap, and he went to look at the building. Front Street in Natchitoches in March has a particular quality in the late afternoon. The light comes off the Cane River at a low angle and hits the brick storefronts in a way that makes them look the same as they did in photographs from 80 years ago. The buildings are narrow and close together. The sidewalks are uneven. There is a smell that belongs to old river towns, specific and difficult to describe, that Earl had known since he was a boy growing up 12 miles east in a house that no longer stood. The coin laundry sat between a hardware store that was still open and a building that had been several things and was currently nothing. The sign above the door read Front Street Laundry in letters that had once been painted white and were now the color of old bone. The plate glass window was intact. Someone had taped a piece of cardboard over the lower half from the inside, which told Earl that the machines had sat at a height that would have been visible from the street. He had a key. The attorney had sent it with the letter. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked at the door. Dwayne Simmons had said Mavis was not thinking clearly. Earl had known Mavis Turo for 20 years. He had watched her manage a building, negotiate with a plumber at 6 in the morning without raising her voice, keep track of every repair she had ever made, in a ledger she kept on the kitchen table. He had watched her read. She read every evening, in the same chair, under the same lamp, for as long as he had known her. She read history, Louisiana history, river history. She read books that were not easy to find, and that she ordered from a shop in New Orleans, and that arrived in brown paper she saved, and used again. Mavis Turode had been one of the clearest thinking people Earl had ever known. He put the key in the lock. The door opened without resistance. The hinges were silent. Someone had oiled them recently, which surprised him. He filed that detail away, without deciding what to do with it. The inside of the building smelled like standing water and old rubber and the particular cold of a space that has not had heat running for a long time. There were 8 machines along the left wall. Industrial washers, the large front-loading kind used in commercial operations. They were not coin-operated household machines. They were the kind you found in the back rooms of hospitals and hotels, and they were too large for this space, and too large for what the sign outside advertised. He stood in the middle of the room and let his eyes adjust. The machines were not connected to anything. The hoses hung loose at the back. 2 of the machines had been pushed against the far wall at an angle, as if someone had tried to move them and stopped. The floor beneath them was a different color than the rest of the floor. Lighter. The concrete had not been exposed to the same decades of foot traffic as the rest of the room. Earl looked at the machines. He looked at the floor. He put his hand flat on the top of the nearest machine. The metal was cold and filmed with dust, and there was nothing unusual about the machine itself. He looked at the floor again. Then he went outside, locked the door, and walked home. He had things to find out before he did anything else. That was a practice he had learned early and kept all his life. You look at a thing, and you think about it, and you find out what you can, before you touch it. He made dinner, ate slowly. He went to bed at his usual hour. He lay awake for a while, thinking about those machines pushed against the wall, and the floor underneath them, and the color that was different. What he found under that floor the following Saturday was not something he had a category for, not yet. But looking back now, it was the only thing that made sense of everything. The building, the machines, the 41 years Mavis Turreau had spent maintaining a coin laundry that hadn't taken a single quarter in 4 years. The attorney's name was Earl Fontaine, and his office was on 2nd Street in a building that had once been a savings and loan. He was a small man with careful handwriting, and the habit of explaining things twice, which Earl appreciated. Earl sat across from him on Thursday at 9:12 in the morning and asked 3 questions. The first question was whether the will was valid. Fontaine said it was. Mavis Turreau had signed it 14 months before her death, in the presence of 2 witnesses and a notary. She had been examined by her physician 6 weeks prior and found to be in full cognitive health. The will had been drawn up by Fontaine himself, at her request after 2 separate consultations. The second question was whether Dwayne Simmons had any legal standing to contest it. Fontaine said he had already received a letter from Simmons's attorney. He said the grounds being cited were undue influence and diminished capacity. He said both claims would be difficult to substantiate given the documentation and the timeline, but that Simmons was entitled to pursue them if he chose. The third question was whether there was anything else in the estate Earl should know about. Fontaine looked at him for a moment. Then he opened a drawer and produced a sealed envelope with Earl's name written on the outside in handwriting. Earl recognized immediately. He had seen it on maintenance requests and birthday cards, and the notes Mavis sometimes left outside his door when she needed to tell him something and he wasn't home. Fontaine said Mavis had left instructions that the envelope be given to Earl in person at the first meeting, before any other business was discussed. Earl looked at it. He put it in his jacket pocket. Fontaine waited. Earl said he would read it when he was ready. He asked if there was other business. There was other business. There were property taxes outstanding, and a utility account that needed to be transferred, and a question about the building's insurance that would require a phone call. Earl listened to all of it and wrote the relevant numbers in a small notebook he kept in his shirt pocket. He thanked Fontaine. He shook his hand. He walked outside into the March morning and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, his hand resting against the outside of his jacket, where the envelope was. He did not open it yet. He walked to the diner on Jefferson Street and ordered coffee and eggs, and ate a full breakfast, which was not something he usually did on a weekday, but he felt that the morning required it. He felt that whatever was in the envelope deserved to be read on a full stomach by a man who had taken his time getting there. He ate slowly. He watched the street through the window. Natchitoches on a Thursday morning had a particular pace. The delivery trucks came early. The shop owners opened their doors and stood in them for a moment before going back inside. A woman walked past with a child on her hip and a bag over one shoulder, and the specific forward lean of someone who is always slightly behind where she needs to be. Earl watched her until she turned the corner. He finished his coffee. He put the cup down. He took the envelope out of his pocket and opened it. Mavis Tureau wrote the way she talked, directly and without ornament. The letter was 2 pages, handwritten on lined paper, dated the previous October. She said she was writing to him because she could not explain the building in person without showing him, and by the time he was reading this, she would not be able to show him herself. She said she was sorry for that. She said she had gone back and forth for years about whether to tell him, and each time she had decided to wait until she was certain he would be staying. And then she had waited too long, the way people do when they are afraid of the wrong thing. She said the building had a basement. She said the basement had something in it that did not belong to her, and never had, and that she had been keeping it safe for 40 years because she had not been able to find anyone she trusted enough to give it to. She said she believed Earl was that person. She said she knew that was a large thing to ask of someone who had only been trying to live quietly. She said she hoped he would forgive her for the weight of it. She said there were things in that basement that the Louisiana State Museum had been looking for since 1987. She did not say what they were. She said he would understand when he saw them. She said the machines in the front room were not connected for a reason. She said the floor beneath the 2 machines pushed against the back wall was not the same as the rest of the floor. She said if he looked at the seam between the 4th and 5th floor tiles from the left wall, he would find something. She said he would need help moving the machines, and that he should find someone he trusted. She signed it, Mavis Tureau, and then below her name, in smaller letters, your neighbor, your friend. I am sorry for the long silence about this. I should have trusted you sooner. I need to stop here for a moment, because the letter Mavis wrote him was 2 pages. And I have told you what she said about the basement, and the machines, and the museum. What I have not told you yet is what she said at the end. The last paragraph, the thing she wrote after she signed her name and then kept writing anyway, in smaller letters, as if she wasn't sure she had the right to say it. That part comes later, but it is the reason this story exists. Earl read the letter through once. He folded it. He put it in his jacket pocket with the envelope. He sat in the diner for a while longer, his hands around the empty coffee cup, not looking at anything in particular. The waitress came and refilled the cup without asking. He thanked her. Outside, a truck backed into a loading space with the slow beeping that trucks make. A door opened and closed. Someone called out to someone else across the street, and the other person laughed. Earl drank the second cup of coffee. Then he paid the bill and went to find Celestine Arsenault. Celestine Arsenault was not difficult to find. She had lived on Amulet Street for 43 years and worked out of her back porch, where she had set up 2 commercial washing machines and a long line of rope between 2 oak trees that she used regardless of the weather because, as she had told Earl once, clothes that dry in the open air smell like something worth wearing. She took in washing for 12 families in the neighborhood. She had done it since her husband passed in 1991, and she had needed income that did not require her to leave her house, because in those years her mother had been living with her, and her mother needed someone close. Her mother had been gone for 16 years now, but Celestine had kept the work because it had become hers in a way that went beyond income. Earl had known her since he moved to the neighborhood. He had fixed her machine twice when the drum bearing went out, because he knew how to do that, and she could not afford a repair service. She had never asked him to. He had simply noticed the machine sitting silent on her porch for a week, and asked if she wanted him to look at it. She was standing at her line when he came through the back gate, pinning a sheet to the rope with the quick practiced motion of someone who has done a thing so many times it has become indistinguishable from breathing. She looked at him. She said she had heard about Mavis. He said yes. She said she was sorry. He said, "Thank you." She finished pinning the sheet and turned to look at him fully. Celestine Arsenault had a way of looking at a person that made small talk feel unnecessary. Earl had always appreciated that about her. He told her he needed help with something at the laundry. He told her it involved moving equipment that was too heavy for one person. He told her he didn't know exactly what he was going to find when they moved it, and that she should know that going in. She said when. He said Saturday morning if she was free. She looked at the line of sheets. She said she could move her Saturday pickup to Sunday. She said she would bring coffee. He said he had a pry bar and a furniture dolly from the building supply on 2nd Street. She said she had a son-in-law with a back like a refrigerator who owed her 3 favors. Earl said that would help. She unpinned a corner of the sheet that had come loose and pinned it again. She did not ask him what he expected to find. She did not ask him why Mavis had left him the building, or whether Dwayne Simmons was going to make trouble. She asked none of the questions that other people would have asked, because she was Celestine, and she understood that a person tells you what they know when they know it, and not before. Earl walked home the long way, along the river road, where the willows hung over the bank, and the water moved with the particular slowness of a river that has been moving in the same direction for longer than anyone can remember. The afternoon had gone cool. He walked with his hands in his pockets and his cap pulled down, and he thought about Mavis Tureau, who had read history every evening under a lamp, and who had been keeping something in a basement for 40 years, and who had looked across a narrow hallway at him every morning for 2 decades, and said good morning and meant it, and had never once said anything about the weight she was carrying. He had not known she was carrying it. He wondered if that was a failure of attention on his part, or whether she had simply been that careful. He decided it was probably both. That was usually how it went with people who kept things quietly. They were so practiced at the keeping that it stopped showing, and the people around them learned to stop looking for it. He had done the same thing himself in his own way, for most of his life. He turned off the river road and walked the last 3 blocks home. The week before Saturday moved the way weeks do when you are waiting for something, without knowing what it is, slow in the middle and then fast at the end. Dwayne Simmons called again on Tuesday. He did not say anything new. He said the same things he had said before, in a slightly different order. Earl listened. He said he understood. He hung up. He went to the laundry twice that week in the evenings, and stood in the front room with his flashlight and looked at the machines. He did not touch them. He was waiting for Saturday. He had learned long ago that the hardest part of any job was not the work itself, but the waiting. To begin, and that the only way through the waiting was to keep your hands occupied with something else. He cleaned the building. That was something he knew how to do. He swept the floors and wiped down the surfaces and cleared the dead leaves that had blown under the door. He checked the plumbing under the utility sink in the back and found a slow leak at the elbow joint and returned the next evening with a pipe wrench and fixed it because it needed fixing and it was his building now, and that was what you did. On Friday evening he went through the building one last time, the front room, the back room, the utility closet, checked the windows. He checked the door. He stood for a moment with his flashlight aimed at the two machines against the back wall. The seam between the fourth and fifth floor tile, from the left wall, he moved the light slowly until he found it. There was a seam there, barely visible, straight as a ruler cut. It was not a grout line. Earl stood very still. He turned off the flashlight. He went home. He cooked dinner. He ate slowly. He went to bed at his usual hour. He slept better than he had expected to. Saturday came cold and bright. Celestine arrived at 7:43 a.m. with a thermos of coffee, and her son-in-law Marcus, who was 11 minutes early because, as Celestine explained without being asked, he was always 11 minutes early, and she had stopped questioning it. Marcus was in fact built like a refrigerator, and shook Earl's hand with the careful pressure of a large man who has learned to be careful about that. They stood in the front room. Celestine looked at the machines. She looked at the floor. She looked at Earl. She said she had been coming to this laundry since 1978. She said she had never noticed those two machines were different from the others. She said she was not sure whether that said something about the machines or something about her. Earl said he thought it said something about Mavis. Celestine nodded. She poured coffee into the thermos cap and handed it to him. He drank it standing up. It was good coffee. She made it strong, the way people in this part of Louisiana had made it for as long as anyone could. Remember, with chicory and patience. Marcus looked at the machines and asked where they were moving them. Earl said against the opposite wall. Marcus said okay. They drank their coffee. Then they went to work. The machines weighed 300 kilograms each. Earl knew that from the model number, which he had looked up earlier in the week. He had brought a furniture dolly with a capacity of 400 kilograms, 2 furniture sliders, and a pry bar. He had measured the distance from the back wall to the opposite wall and confirmed there was clearance. The first machine was the harder one. The feet had corroded slightly to the concrete and required the pry bar to break the seal. Earl worked the bar under the left front corner while Marcus held the machine from tipping, and on the third try the foot broke free with a sound like a jar being opened. Then the right front corner, then both back corners. Then the dolly went under. Marcus took the weight. Earl guided from the side. The machine moved. Under the front left foot, where the floor had been sealed for however long, there was a circle of concrete that was darker than the concrete around it. Slightly raised, Earl crouched and looked at it. He pressed his thumb against it. The surface was solid. He stood up. They moved the second machine the same way. The feet on this one were worse. Marcus had to put his full weight into holding the top, while Earl worked the pry bar under each corner in turn, rocking the foot free with small, sharp movements. The second back corner took 4 minutes and left a mark on the floor where the bar had slipped twice. The machine came free on the third attempt. It rolled on the dolly to the opposite wall. The floor was fully visible now. The seam Mavis had described ran from the left wall to a point approximately 4 feet out, then turned at a right angle and ran parallel to the wall for another 4 feet, then turned again toward the wall, a rectangle, 3 feet wide, 4 feet long. The grout lines around the perimeter were slightly lighter than the surrounding floor, which meant they were newer. In the center of the rectangle, barely visible, was a small iron ring set flush with the tile. Earl looked at it for a moment. Celestine stood beside him. Marcus stood behind them both. Nobody said anything. What Earl felt was not what he expected to feel. He had thought he might feel excitement or anxiety, or the particular anticipation of a man about to find out whether a thing was real. What he felt instead was a kind of stillness. The same stillness he had felt on the mornings when a job he had been dreading turned out to be straightforward and manageable, when the problem turned out to be exactly the problem and not something else underneath it. He crouched down. He put his fingers around the iron ring. It was cold, smaller than it looked. The metal was rough with age, but solid. He pulled. The ring held. He pulled harder. The tile section moved, not smoothly. It scraped against the surrounding floor with a low grinding sound, concrete against concrete, and Earl had to shift his grip and pull with both hands before it came fully free. The section was thicker than he expected. Not just tile. Tile set into a concrete slab approximately 4 inches deep, framed in iron on all 4 sides, a hatch. Built to look like floor, he set it to the side. Marcus stepped forward and aimed his phone flashlight into the opening. The 3 of them looked down. There were stairs. Stone stairs, narrow, descending at a steep angle into darkness. The walls on either side were brick. Old brick, hand-laid. the mortar between the courses gone gray with age. The stairway was approximately 2 feet wide enough for one person at a time. The air that came up through the opening was different from the air in the room. Cooler, drier, with a smell that took Earl a moment to identify. Old wood, river clay, and underneath both of those something that might have been paper. The specific smell of paper that has been in a dark place for a very long time. Earl stood up. He got his flashlight from his jacket pocket. He tested the beam against the wall. He looked at Celestine. She looked at the stairs. She said she had been coming to this building since 1978. She said she never knew. Earl said Mavis knew. Celestine was quiet for a moment. Then she said yes. Mavis knew everything about this block. She had always known things about this block that other people didn't. Marcus asked if the stairs were safe. Earl said he didn't know yet. He said he was going to find out. He sat at the edge of the opening and put his feet on the first step. He tested his weight slowly, the way you test ice at the edge of a pond. The stone held. He moved to the second step, the third, the fourth. The stairs were solid. He went down. The stairway was 11 steps. Earl counted them without deciding to count them. That was a habit from years of working in buildings. You count the steps when you go down, so you know how many there are when you come back up in the dark. At the bottom, the passage opened into a space approximately 12 feet wide and 30 feet long. The ceiling was low, 6 feet, maybe 6.5. Earl could stand upright, barely. The walls were the same hand-laid brick as the stairway. The floor was packed earth, not concrete, and it was dry, despite the proximity of the river. The air was cool and still and carried no moisture. He moved the flashlight slowly around the space. There were wooden beams supporting the ceiling at intervals of approximately 4 feet. The beams were rough-hewn, notched into the brick walls on either side, and they were old enough that the wood had gone dark and hard, the way old wood does when it has been in a protected space for generations. They were solid. Earl put his hand on the nearest one and pressed upward. It did not move. Against the left wall in the far corner, there were 2 wooden crates, large ones, the kind used for shipping dry goods before cardboard became standard. The wood was darker than the beams, but the same age, roughly. The lids were intact. There was a third crate set apart from the others, smaller, closer to the center of the room, with a metal clasp on the front that had gone the color of old pennies. Against the right wall, there were iron rings set into the brick at intervals of about 2 feet, at a height of approximately 4 feet from the floor. They ran the full length of the wall. Earl counted them. There were 14. He stood in the middle of the room and looked at the rings. He knew what the rings were. He had grown up in Louisiana. He had grown up hearing his grandmother talk about the things that had happened in the places she had lived, the things that were still present in the ground, and the walls, even when the buildings above them had changed. She had taken him once, when he was 11 years old, to a site near Melrose Plantation, where there was a structure that had been used in ways that the historical marker outside did not fully explain, and she had told him to pay attention to the walls, to what was in the walls, because walls remembered things even when people tried to forget them. He paid attention to the walls. He looked at the iron rings, 14 of them, set at a uniform height, spaced evenly, each one forged individually, the metalwork slightly different from ring to ring in the way of things made by hand. He stood very still. The flashlight beam moved across the rings, across the brick between them. There were marks in the brick, not grout lines, not structural damage. Marks made deliberately, at different heights, some near the floor, some at waist height, some at the level of the rings. Lines, initials possibly, symbols. The brick had been soft when some of these were made, and had since hardened around them. Earl stood in that room for a long time without moving. From above he heard Celestine's voice, asking if he was all right. He said yes. He said he was coming up. He said she should come down. Celestine Arsenault came down the stairs the way she did everything, steadily and without comment. She stood at the bottom and let her eyes adjust. Earl moved the flashlight so she could see the room gradually, the way Mavis's letter had let him understand it gradually. He felt that was the right way to show someone a place like this. You did not aim a light at everything at once. She saw the beams, the crates, the small box with the copper clasp. Then she turned and saw the right wall. She stood very still. Earl did not say anything. He let her look. After a while, she moved to the wall. She put her hand flat against the brick between 2 of the rings, her palm against the mortar, against the marks. She stood like that for a long time, with her hand on the wall, and her head slightly bowed, and Earl stood behind her and did not speak, because there was nothing to say that the room had not already said better. Marcus called down from above, asking if they needed anything. Celestine said not right now. Her voice was steady. Earl noticed that. Her voice was completely steady. She turned from the wall. She looked at the crates in the corner. She looked at the small box. She said she thought she knew what this was. Earl said he thought so too. She said she had read about stations on this stretch of the river. She said there had been records that suggested there were structures underneath some of the older Front Street buildings, but nobody had been able to confirm it because the buildings had changed hands so many times, and the owners had not always known what was under them. Earl said Mavis knew. Celestine said Mavis Tureau had bought this building in 1983, and that she had probably known within the first year what was underneath it, and that she had spent 40 years deciding what to do about it, and keeping it safe in the meantime. Earl looked at the crates. He looked at the small box with the copper clasp. He said he thought they should look at the box first. The box was approximately 18 inches long and 12 inches wide and 8 inches deep. The wood was dry and intact. The copper clasp had no lock. Earl crouched in front of it and pressed the clasp with his thumb, and it moved on the first try, stiff but functional, the metal worn smooth in the center where it had been opened before. He lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had gone brown but had done its job, was a collection of documents. Not loose documents, organized ones, sorted into groups and bound with cord that had dried and darkened over the years but not rotted. Each group was wrapped separately in the oilcloth. There were 8 groups in total. Earl lifted the top group carefully. The cord was fragile. He did not untie it. He held the oilcloth-wrapped bundle and looked at the edge of the papers visible at one end. The paper was old, very old. The edge had gone the color of weak tea, and the texture was different from modern paper, thicker, and with a slight roughness that he could feel even through the oilcloth. He set it back carefully. He looked at the other bundles. One of them was slightly different from the rest. The oilcloth was newer, not by much, but enough to see. The cord was different too. Someone had rewrapped this one sometime after the others had been packed. The rewrapping was careful and thorough, but the oilcloth was not the same age. He picked it up. He held it for a moment. He did not open it. Celestine was watching him. He looked at her. He said he did not think they should open these down here. He said he thought they should document the room first, the walls and the rings and the marks in the brick, and then bring the box upstairs and call someone who knew what they were looking at. Celestine said she knew someone. She said there was a woman at Northwestern State who had been writing about underground railroad sites in the Cane River region for 12 years. She said she had met her at a talk at the public library 3 years ago and had her card somewhere. Earl said that sounded right. He set the bundle back in the box. He closed the lid. The clasp caught on the second try. He pressed it until he heard it seat. Then he stood up and looked at the room one more time. The beams, the walls, the rings, the marks in the brick near the floor. The air was still cool and dry. Still. The kind of stillness that accumulates over a very long time in a space that has been kept closed and dark and undisturbed. It was not an empty stillness. It was a full one. The difference between a room that has never been used and a room that was used for something that mattered and then sealed and kept. He had cleaned a lot of buildings in his life. He had been in a lot of rooms that people had left behind. He had learned to read what a room held, the way you learn to read anything, through attention and time. This room had been holding something for 150 years. It had been waiting for someone to come down the stairs and understand what it was. He picked up the box. He carried it to the stairs. He went up. In the front room, the morning light had shifted. It came through the plate glass window at a different angle now, lower and more direct, and it lit the dust in the air above the machines, in a way that made the room look different from when they had arrived. Warmer? Earl set the box on the floor near the window. Marcus was sitting on the edge of one of the machines. He looked at Earl. He looked at the box. He looked at Earl again. Earl said they had found something significant. Marcus said how significant. Celestine said very. Marcus nodded. He did not ask more than that. Earl looked at the box on the floor in the morning light. The wood was old and dry, and the copper clasp had gone the color of old pennies. It was not a remarkable-looking object. It was the kind of thing you would pass at an estate sale and not stop for. Mavis Tureau had kept it in a sealed room under a coin laundry for 40 years. She had bought a building on Front Street and maintained it, and paid taxes on it, and oiled the door hinges and kept the windows intact. And she had done all of that because something needed to be kept, and she had understood that. Keeping required a structure and a location and someone willing to be responsible for it. She had looked for that person for 40 years. She had found him across a narrow hallway. Earl put his hand on the lid of the box. The wood was cool under his palm. He left his hand there for a moment. Then he took it off. He picked up his thermos. He poured the last of Celestine's coffee into the cap. It was cold now. He drank it anyway. The woman from Northwestern State was named Dr. Pauline Arsenault. Celestine said she was not related, as far as anyone could trace, but that in Natchitoches that did not mean much because the name went back far enough that everyone with it was probably related somewhere if you went back far enough. Earl called the number on the card that Saturday afternoon. He expected a voicemail. He got Dr. Arsenault herself, who was apparently in her office on a weekend because, as she explained without being asked, she was always in her office on weekends during the semester because the weekdays were consumed by things that were not her research, and the research was the reason she was there. Earl told her he had something she might want to see. He told her it was on Front Street. He told her it was underground. There was a pause on the line. She asked how underground. He said 11 steps. Another pause. She asked if he could send her a photograph of the room. He said he could. She said she would look at it within the hour and call him back. He sent her 3 photographs. The stairway, the right wall with the rings, the marks in the brick near the floor. She called back in 14 minutes. She said she was coming Saturday. He said this was Saturday. She said she was coming this afternoon. Dr. Pauline Arsenault arrived at the Front Street Laundry at 2:47 in the afternoon in a car that was older than most of her graduate students, and that contained, as far as Earl could tell from the back seat, approximately 40 years of accumulated field research. She was a small woman in her mid-60s with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the specific energy of a person who has been waiting a long time for something and has just been told it is ready. She went down the stairs without hesitation. She stood in the room for a long time without speaking. She looked at the walls. She looked at the rings. She crouched and examined the marks in the brick near the floor, moving her flashlight slowly, taking photographs with her phone. She measured the spacing of the rings with a tape measure she produced from her jacket pocket. She pressed her fingers into the mortar between courses, checking the age of the repair work, distinguishing between the original construction and the maintenance that had been done over the years. Earl stood near the stairs and let her work. After 40 minutes, she stood up and looked at him. She said this was the 3rd confirmed station site on the Cane River corridor. She said the other 2 were on the opposite bank and had been documented in the 1990s. She said there had been evidence in historical records suggesting a 3rd site on the Front Street side, but that no physical location had ever been identified. She said the iron rings were consistent with documented station sites in the region. She said that marks in the brick were consistent with documentation practices used by people moving through stations, marking that they had been there. She said the room was intact. She said the structural condition was exceptional. She said she had been in documented sites that were in significantly worse condition than this one. Earl said Mavis Tureau had owned the building for 41 years. Dr. Arsenault looked at him. Earl said he believed Mavis had known about the room and had maintained the building specifically to protect it. Dr. Arsenault was quiet for a moment. Then she said that explained a number of things about the building's condition that had seemed unusual to her. She said she needed to make one thing clear before they went further. She said the Louisiana State Museum had an open acquisition file for documentary collections of this type from the Cane River region. She said the file had been open since 1987. She said, based on what she had seen in the past 40 minutes, the collection in the small box, together with the physical documentation of the room itself, would qualify for acquisition funding. She said, the figure in the current file was $346,940. Earl looked at the box on the floor between them. He said nothing for a moment. He said he appreciated her telling him that. She said she thought he should know the number before they went any further, because the number had a way of changing how people thought about what they were holding. Earl looked at the box. He looked at the rings on the wall. He said it didn't change how he thought about it. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said she believed him, and she said that was exactly why Mavis had chosen him. If you've made it this far into Earl's story, hit subscribe, because what I found in that box is the part I have been waiting to tell you. She said she needed to look at what was in the crates and the box. Earl said that was why he had called her. The two large crates contained tools and provisions, not the original contents, whatever those had been. The crates had been repacked at some point in the late 19th century, based on the materials inside, and then repacked again sometime in the early 20th. Canned goods long past any use, a lantern, rope, blankets that had gone to dust but left the shape of themselves in the oilcloth they had been, wrapped in, a tin box containing matches that crumbled at the touch, a water container, ceramic, intact, practical things. The things you left in a place where people might arrive with nothing and need to rest before. Continuing, Dr. Arsenault documented each item methodically. She moved carefully and handled everything with gloved hands. She had produced from the same jacket pocket as the tape measure. She did not rush. Earl watched her work. He thought about the people who had come down those stairs. He thought about coming down 11 steps into a room with a low ceiling and iron rings on the wall. Coming down after however many days or weeks of traveling and finding blankets and water and a lantern. Coming down and being able to stop, for a night, for whatever the stop allowed, before continuing. He thought about what it meant to keep a place like that intact. To own a building above it for 41 years and maintain the building and pay the taxes and oil the door hinges and make sure the plate glass window stayed unbroken, knowing what was underneath. He had thought Mavis Turode was just a landlord. He had not known who she was. He should have. He did not let himself stay with that thought too long. It was not a useful direction. He filed it away in the place where he put things that were true but not actionable, and he went back to watching Dr. Arsenault work. The small box was last. Dr. Arsenault set it on the floor between the two of them and opened the clasp. She lifted the lid. She looked at the contents for a moment without touching them. Then she lifted the top bundle in her gloved hands and held it carefully. She examined the oilcloth wrapping. She turned it over slowly, looking at the cord, the way it had been tied, the condition of the cloth. She set it aside without opening it and looked at the others. She found the rewrapped bundle. She stopped. She turned it over. She looked at the cord. She did not speak for a moment. The flashlight was aimed at the floor between them. The room was very quiet. From somewhere above, through 11 steps of stone and brick and packed earth, Earl could hear the faint sound of the river wind moving through the willows on the bank. He had heard that sound every evening for 20 years from his apartment window. He had not known any of those evenings that he was hearing it 11 steps above this room. She looked at the cord again. She said the rewrapping on this one was done approximately 40 to 60 years ago. She said the oilcloth was consistent with material available in the 1960s to 1980s. She said someone had opened this bundle at some point, examined the contents, and rewrapped them carefully. Earl, said Mavis, bought the building in 1983. Dr. Arsenault looked at him. She said that was consistent. She untied the cord on the rewrapped bundle. Slowly she folded the oilcloth back. Inside were documents, handwritten, multiple pages, stitched together at the left margin, with thread that had been replaced at some point, the original thread having failed, and someone having re-stitched the pages carefully to preserve their order. The top page had a date, 1857. Dr. Arsenault held it at an angle to the flashlight beam. She read quietly. Earl could see her eyes moving across the lines. After a while, she lowered the pages. She said it was a manifest. Earl said, what kind of manifest? She said it was a record of people who had passed through this location. Names, dates, points of origin, destinations. She said it covered the period from 1849 to 1861. She said there were 112 names. Earl did not speak for a moment. He looked at the pages in Dr. Arsenault's gloved hands. The handwriting was small and careful. The letters formed with the deliberate precision of someone writing in difficult conditions. Probably by poor light. Probably quickly. Probably aware that the document itself was a risk. 112 names. Written down by someone who understood that names mattered. That the act of recording a name was an act of insisting that the person bearing it was real and present and had passed through this place and continued on. Dr. Arsenault turned to the second page, the third. She said the handwriting changed partway through. She said it looked like 2 or 3 different people had contributed to the record over the years, passing the document and the responsibility for it from one keeper to the next. She said this was consistent with how station records worked when they existed at all. She said most stations had left no written records because written records were dangerous. She said a document like this, if it had been found in the wrong hands, would have been destroyed immediately along with everything and everyone associated with it. She said the people who made this record understood the risk they were taking. Earl said they made it anyway. She said yes, they made it anyway. She set the pages down carefully on the floor of the room. She looked at the other bundles. She opened each one in turn, carefully, documenting as she went. Letters. 2 of them, written in the same careful handwriting as the first portion of the manifest, addressed to no one by name, describing the layout of the route. Safe houses, safe crossings, times and distances, written in language that was careful about what it said directly and what it left to be understood. More documents, property records, 2 receipts from a dry goods store dated 1863, a hand-drawn map on cloth that showed a stretch of the Cane River and marked 2 crossing points with small symbols Earl did not recognize but that Dr. Arsenault identified as consistent with markings used in conductor communications of the period. She lifted the last bundle. She set it down. She looked at the box. It was empty except for one thing. And then she found something that was not like the other documents. I want to be careful about how I tell you this part, because what was at the bottom of that box had been there for a long time, and it had been put there deliberately, and the person who put it there understood exactly what it meant. She set everything else aside. She reached to the bottom of the box, a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds. Dr. Arsenault unfolded it. She read it. She held it for a long time without saying anything. Earl waited. She turned it so he could see it. It was a list of names, not the manifest. A different list, shorter, 11 names, written in the same hand as the manifest. Beside each name a date. Beside each date a single word or phrase. The word beside the first name was continued. The word beside the second name was continued. The word beside 4 of the names was continued. The word beside 2 of the names was settled. The word beside 3 of the names was family. At the bottom of the list in different ink, added later by a different hand, was a single line. Dr. Arsenault read it aloud. She said, "These people are remembered here." Earl sat down on the floor of the room. He did not plan to sit down. He was simply standing, and then he was sitting, his back against the brick wall opposite the rings, his legs in front of him on the packed earth floor. Dr. Arsenault sat down too, on the other side of the small box, and did not say anything about the fact that they were both sitting on the floor of a room under a coin laundry on a Saturday afternoon. After a while, Earl said he needed to tell her something. He told her about Mavis's letter, about the museum, about the $346,940. Dr. Arsenault listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said the Louisiana State Museum had been in correspondence with a private collector in Baton Rouge since 2019 regarding documents of this type from the Cane River region. She said the collector had been offering a set of items whose provenance she had always found suspicious, given that no confirmed site existed on the Front Street side of the river. She said she had recommended against the acquisition on those grounds. She said she now understood why the provenance had been suspicious. She said the collector had been offering documents that had been taken from this room. Earl said by whom. She said she did not know yet. She said she would find out. Earl thought about Dwayne Simmons. He thought about the phone calls, the language Dwayne had used. Reasonable people. Reasonable conclusion. He did not say anything yet. He filed it away. Dr. Arsenault said the documents remaining in the box, together with the room itself, represented a find of significant historical importance. She said the museum's acquisition offer was for the documentary collection alone. She said the room, as a physical site, had a separate significance that was not captured by that number. She said there were preservation grants and historical landmark designations and other mechanisms that would apply, and that the value to the historical record was not something that could be expressed as a single dollar amount. Earl said he understood. He looked at the box. He looked at the walls. He looked at the rings on the opposite wall, 14 of them, spaced evenly, each one forged by hand. He said he was not going to sell it. Dr. Arsenault looked at him. He said he was not going to sell any of it. He said the documents would go to the museum. He said the room would be preserved. He said the building would stay. She said that was a significant commitment for a building appraised at $800. He said he was aware of what it was appraised at. She said the preservation and maintenance would require ongoing funding. She said there were grant mechanisms she could help him navigate. She said the museum partnership would include operational support for verified sites. Earl said he had cleaned buildings for 38 years. He said he knew how to maintain a structure. Dr. Arsenault looked at him for a moment. Then she said she believed him. They sat in the room for a while longer. Dr. Arsenault began repacking the documents with the same care she had used to unpack them. Earl watched her work. There was a quality to the way she handled the oilcloth bundles that he recognized from his own work. The attention you gave a thing when you understood it could not be replaced. He thought about the number, $346,940. He had never in his life held a number like that in connection with his own name. He had cleaned buildings worth 50 times that. He had maintained boilers and electrical panels and HVAC systems that cost more than that to install. He had done all of it for wages that, over 38 years, had added up to something considerably less than the number sitting in a box on the floor of a room 11 steps below Front Street. He was aware of what it would mean to a man in his position to keep that money. He was also aware that it was not his. The documents were not his. The room was not his. The names in the manifest were not his. The rings on the wall were not his. The responsibility he had been given was to hold these things, not to own them. Mavis Toureau had understood the difference. She had held the building for 41 years and had not confused holding with owning. Earl looked at the rings. He counted them again. 14, the same number as before. He did not know why he counted them again. He did it the way you check a door you have already locked. Not because you think it is open, because some things are worth checking twice. Dr. Arsenault tied the cord on the last bundle and placed it back in the box. She closed the lid. She looked at the clasp. She said she would return on Thursday with the conservator from the museum and the proper archival materials. She said they would need to do a full structural assessment of the room before it could be opened to the public. Earl said he understood. She said it could take months. She said in the meantime the room should be secured and the hatch recovered properly. She said he should keep a log of anyone who accessed the building. He said he had been keeping a log since the first week. She looked at him. He said it was habit. He had kept maintenance logs on every building he had ever worked in. He still had notebooks going back to 1991. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said that was going to matter. Dwayne Simmons came to the building on the following Wednesday. He did not call first. Earl was in the front room when Dwayne tried the door and found it unlocked and came in. Dwayne was a large man in his mid-50s, with the particular confidence of someone who has never had to adjust his expectations very much. He looked around the front room. He looked at the two machines that had been moved to the opposite wall. He looked at the section of floor where the hatch was, which Earl had recovered with a piece of plywood cut to size. He looked at Earl. He said he had heard Earl had been in contact with someone from the university. Earl said that was correct. Dwayne said he hoped Earl understood that anything found in the building was subject to the estate proceedings and could not be transferred or disposed of until the contest was resolved. Earl said he had spoken to Earl Fontaine about that. Dwayne said he was sure Fontaine had his perspective. Earl said Fontaine had sent him a letter that morning confirming that the will was valid, that the contest had no substantive grounds, and that the estate had been fully transferred. Dwayne looked at him. Earl said the letter also noted that Dwayne's own attorney had advised him in writing that the contest was unlikely to succeed, and that Dwayne had chosen to proceed anyway. Dwayne said that was between him and his attorney. Earl said he agreed. He said he also wanted to mention that Dr. Arsenault had identified, through her research, that a collection of documents from this site had been offered for private sale in Baton Rouge in 2019. He said the seller had not been formally identified yet. He said Dr. Arsenault had notified the museum's acquisitions committee, which had a legal obligation to report potential provenance fraud to the state attorney general's office. He said he mentioned this only as information. Dwayne stood in the front room. He looked at the plywood over the hatch. He looked at Earl. He did not say anything. Earl said he appreciated the visit. Dwayne left. He did not close the door all the way behind him. Earl walked over and closed it the rest of the way. He tested the latch. He went back to what he had been doing. He did not feel satisfaction about that conversation, exactly. What he felt was more like the completion of a task that had needed doing. A door that had been hanging crooked, rehung properly. You did not feel triumphant about a door. You felt it was done. The documents went to the Louisiana State Museum 6 weeks later, transported by Dr. Arsenault and a conservator from the museum's collections department in archival boxes in a climate-controlled vehicle. Earl watched them go from the doorway of the laundry. The appraisal, once the collection was formally assessed, came to $346,940. Earl transferred the full amount to a preservation trust that Dr. Arsenault helped him establish, designated for the maintenance of the Front Street site, and for educational programming connected to it. He kept nothing. He did not keep anything because there was nothing to keep. The documents belonged to the record. The room belonged to the history. The building belonged to the work of keeping both of those things intact. He was the custodian. That was a word he knew. He had been a custodian for 38 years. He understood what it meant. It meant you were responsible for something that was not yours. It meant you kept it safe and in good condition and passed it on better than you found it. It did not mean you owned it. It meant you were trusted with it. Mavis Thoreau had been trusted with it. Now he was. He locked the front door of the laundry. He tested the handle. He walked home along the river road, the same way he had walked the week after he received the letter, under the same willows, past the same slow water. The afternoon was warm. April now, the willows were green. He walked with his hands in his pockets and thought about a woman who had read history every evening under a lamp for 20 years, and never said a word about what she was keeping underneath her building. And he thought about what it cost to carry something like that alone, and he thought about the 14 iron rings on a brick wall 11 steps below, a coin laundry on Front Street, and the names written in careful handwriting by someone who understood that writing a name down was the least you could do, and also the most. He walked home. He made dinner. He ate slowly. History is not kept in museums. It is kept by ordinary people who understood its weight and chose not to put it down. Earl Fontaine inherited a coin laundry on Front Street worth $800. He did not inherit the money. He did not inherit the recognition. He did not inherit anything that would have looked like much from the outside. From the perspective of a man like Dwayne Simmons, calculating the value of a thing by what it could be sold for, he inherited a responsibility, and the responsibility was this, that the people who had come down those stairs and rested in that room and continued on, whose names had been written in careful handwriting by someone who understood the cost of being forgotten, would not be forgotten now. Not because their story was in a museum, not because a designation had come through on a Tuesday in September, but because someone had been given the building and had understood what it meant to be given a building and had stayed. That is what Mavis Thoreau knew about Earl Fontaine after 20 years in a hallway no wider than a man's armspan. That when it mattered, he would stay. If this story stayed with you today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for a new story every week and leave a comment. Is there a place in your town that holds a history most people don't know about?